Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted questions and challenges by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms.
Welcome to IB Unplugged. This time, both of us joining you from here in Stockholm. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We're in the nice time of the year where we have sunshine all day long, all night too.
Yeah, I wasn't used to that at all. I went to sleep in the light, I woke up in the light, and my body was not ready for that.
No, but that's why we recruit people to Stockholm during the summer and not the winter where you're surrounded by darkness.
I get it.
So yeah, we got to do some episodes here in Stockholm together. And today's episode, we get to talk with John coming in from Switzerland. So John Cannings is somebody that I've gotten the chance to work with since 2017. We met working on our geography resources for Cognity. He's been working as a geography teacher and a CAS coordinator, working with experiential learning. So he's been deep in the IB world, doing everything from the workshops, authoring books, the whole IB bingo card. I think he could hit kind of every square there. So he today talks a lot about sustainability, and yeah, it was great to talk with him.
Definitely. I think you're going to get a lot from this episode. If you've ever wondered how can we authentically create sustainable schools, or what's the role of a leader in creating that sustainable school, is there anything worth a CAS offsite sort of trip or going offsites to get that sustainability focus, or even just how do you take students from being aware that sustainability is an issue to how they can start to take some action, then there's a lot in this episode for you.
Yeah. So let's bring John in. Hi, John. Welcome to IB Unplugged. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Courtney. It's a pleasure to see you and meet with you again. It's a blast from the past from my perspective, and of course to meet John this morning.
Nice to meet you as well, John. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah. So, John, we've worked with each other for quite a while now. You were one of the first people that I worked with at Cognity back in 2017. You've done a lot since then, and you've done plenty before then as well. And I want to kick this conversation off with just asking why you chose to go into education.
Well, I guess this sounds a bit trite, but I suppose the reason was that I felt that I could make a difference to trying to make the world a better place. Now, whether that's been the case or not, so for other people to judge.
I like that. I think many educators go into it with that idea of like, here's my way that I can have a positive impact. So I like that. What about your new role? What are you doing now? What's your role, and what are you focusing on with regard to sustainable education?
A couple of things. First of all, I suppose in a way I've been, I hate to use this word, influencer, but I've written a number of blogs about sustainability. I ran with a brilliant educator called Alexandra Catallo, a series of webinars for SUSED, in which we interviewed people who are making changes in school. And I guess the most recent thing I've been involved with is Eco School Suisse, or J'aime ma planète, excuse my French pronunciation, as a jury member, in which we've been going in to schools to have a look at whether the school qualifies for one of their awards. And that's taken me into a variety of different schools, Swiss school, international school, boarding school. So it's been very interesting to see how the different schools have approached that.
Great. And yeah, the conversation today, we're going to talk a lot about rethinking sustainability in schools and kind of diving into some of the work that you've done. But before we do, we wanted to do a little series of some rapid fire questions of things that we wanted to learn more about, for better or for worse. So I will kick off with a very important one of, is the coffee better in Australia, where you're from, or Switzerland, where you live?
Okay, well, that's a hard question. No one makes flat whites as well as they do in Australia. That's all I would say.
Ooh, okay. That's a tough one. All right, here's another one. What's better, authoring books or leading workshops?
Both of them are really interesting experiences. I think authoring the books, for me, one of the biggest challenges has been working with an editor particularly.
Working with me.
Not only with Courtney. But that's been really good because it helps you to focus on things. They give you a different insight and approach to the way you're doing things. I really enjoy the social contact of workshops, and also it helps you to have a broader understanding of how people perceive things in very different environments. And, from doing that both online and face-to-face, I've dealt with people from even places like Burkina Faso, which I thought I'd never have anyone in contact with.
Fair. Next one, if you could only be either a CAS coordinator at a local school or lead geography workshops, what would you prefer?
I think CAS coordinator.
Ooh, okay. I'm sure we're going to get into that and sort of the impact that you think that we can have with when we're a CAS coordinator. What about, with regard to workshops and thinking about that and teaching students, do you prefer teaching students or do you prefer teaching teachers?
I think at this stage of things, I'd definitely say teaching teachers. I've been there, done that with teaching students. And given that I stopped teaching students 11 years ago, I actually last November, from August to November, I was actually back in the classroom in a Swiss school which was an interesting experience.
Nice.
With younger kids mainly. It was certainly challenging. I was pretty rusty, I have to say, to start with. So, I think that answers that question.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I have a confession, John. It's been a long time since I read your CV and your biography the first time, and I still have no idea what it means that you're a chartered geographer. Can you tell me what it means?
That means I'm a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society.
Okay.
And the reason I was asked to be that was I was actually chair of a humanities committee a long time ago with ECIS. Since then, one of the things they've been looking for people to do is actually to promote and lead geography in different contexts, which I have been doing, obviously, as a school teacher, as a workshop leader, and as you know, I've written a bit of stuff about geography as well. So, and I'm still doing that. I've written a couple of things this year about demographic changes in the world and the impact they're likely to have. And I've also still retained a role as an examiner for the extended essay in geography with the IB.
Nice. Well, John, that's the rapid fire round. You did great. You got all the way through there. And I feel like with those warm-up questions and obviously what you've just shared now, hopefully, I feel like I know you a bit better, and hopefully our listeners understand you're bringing a wealth of experience to this conversation today as we talk about building sustainability mindsets through experiences themselves. And we've got a few segments we want to get into, I guess. But in this first segment, let's talk about rethinking sustainability in schools. Often, I think sustainability can be thought of as like a bolt-on or something that a school has to think of in addition to what they're already doing. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what does it truly mean for a school to be sustainable with regard to school decisions, with their values, with their actions? What comes to mind when you think of the ideal sustainable school?
Okay, I can actually think of some schools that are like that, but I actually really like a framework that a company called Metanoia used to actually identify the characteristics of a sustainable school. And it's a 5-pointer. The first one of these is the campus itself sustainable? So do they use sustainable energy? What's their water use? Do they recycle water? What, for example, is the building material like? How's waste disposed? How do students travel? And so on. And I think another one of the important aspects of that is in what way do schools actually procure materials and where do they procure them from? Because let's face it, schools contribute to the economy in quite a big way in their own way.
Well, and by that nature also, then climate impact in a pretty significant way too, right? I mean, often when I think a school thinks about sustainable practices, they think about printing and they think about how much paper they're using or how often they're online. But I like that you brought in right away just building materials and water usage and waste and this sort of thing, because it's more than just what's kind of the quickly tangible, turn off the lights when you're done kind of thing, right?
Right. And I mean, also if you're in the fortunate position, which I guess you would be, John, perhaps where you are in Austria, where you actually have nature as part of the school property.
Mm-hmm.
So how well is that actually looked after?
Yeah.
Okay, the second one of the points is really about communication. How well does the school actually communicate its own story about sustainability and the things that are going on in the school through its website, through its students, through newsletters and so on. And a third one is really about community and how the school relates to the local community and how the school's behaviour influences the local community. And that, I think, is an area that many schools aren't so good in sort of dealing with, about how the way that they operate actually influences the local community. I'll give you a very simple example, is where schools are located in a suburb and the traffic congestion around schools caused by parents taking people in and out of schools. Now, it doesn't send a great message about the sustainability of the school itself.
Yeah, I'd like to, as you're talking about, community as well as communication, it sounds like there's so much more with regard to how you speak about it. Because it's not just, I think oftentimes people talk about sustainability and they think like I'm the problem and therefore I'm just being called out by being the problem. So how well you communicate that message to everybody about solutions-oriented things, I guess, or ways in which we talk about it that then embed not just at the school, but the whole community itself, right?
Yeah, and also I think engaging with the local environment, and I'm thinking of my Swiss context, particularly where schools have actually been involved in looking after bits and pieces of nature reserves and improving the quality of those. Mm-hmm. And that sends also its own message to the local community, I think. The next one of the points, I think, is absolutely critical to sustainability in any school, and it's about the culture of the school. How much is the board and the senior administration of the school aligned with the idea of sustainability? Is it a key part of a school's mission statement? And a couple of examples, for example, the mission statement of the Green Schools, to create a global community of learners making our world sustainable. And another example I have is from the Australian International School in Singapore. This school integrates sustainability into its curriculum and campus operations, promoting environmental awareness and responsibility among its students. So that's a clear statement in both cases about what the school wants to do. There's no doubt when the key administrators are on board and supportive and actually take a role in doing things, then things happen. And some time ago, I did a course on sustainability, which was just with the Royal Geographical Society, and it was full of businessmen. And they were saying that sustainability works in their operations when the CEO takes an active role and he actually makes sure that the line managers are involved in this and observes what the line managers are doing. If you draw that parallel with schools, same principles basically. So I think that's something that's really important, and I'd say is one of the real keys to how sustainable a school is.
Does that then go beyond just setting like, here's our statement, here's our mission statement? It sounds like what you're talking about is that the leaders in the school are also living by example. So they're bringing that forward. You know, when I think about culture, as you talk about, culture is kind of like what arrives at the school gates every day and what kind of happens within it. So is this more of the angle of like your leaders are then leading by example and more than just what we see written in policies, for example, or mission statements? Is it like how that's lived out then?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think being involved directly with kids, I'll give you an example from the Swiss school I worked at here, the Freies Gymnasium. They decided as a project when they were 150 years old, that they would actually take responsibility for completely clearing, renovating a stream here and the area around it. And the rector of the school actually went and worked with the kids. And that's a very clear statement to the kids and also the staff members, you know, this is something that's important.
Yeah.
And, I've had my own experience of working with, as a CAS coordinator, working with principals that were that engaged as well. And the last one of the points, which I'm not sure how much you want me to talk about, but is really about the curriculum and how embedded sustainability is in the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And if I can, I just make some observations that I've seen that when you look internationally across various curriculums, you see examples in Scotland, in Germany, in Sweden, and the UK. They all have statements about sustainability. And there are often, it tends to be, though, restricted to a couple of subject areas. Biology and geography are the flavour of the month, and also economics to a certain extent. And one of the things which is clear about sustainability is the need to have an interdisciplinary approach. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the big exam systems like A-levels, the IB diploma particularly, it's very hard to actually manage that. It can only be managed through some things which in the IB diploma, which are the core of the diploma, the extended essay, CAS and theory of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And often that depends on the skill of the teacher delivering those things to actually bring that in. However, with some of the younger programs, for example, that the IB runs, it is possible to have, in the middle years program and also the primary years program, interdisciplinary inquiries, which the kids can be involved in and in which you can start to integrate some of the capabilities that you're looking for.
Are you an IB educator wanting to improve your practice and needing just a bit more support getting there? Ever wanted to learn more about a specific aspect of the diploma program, or just ask a question to an educational theorist about a specific IB aspect? IB Unplugged is the place for you. Simply visit cognity.com/IB Unplugged to submit your question to us and have your question explored in more detail in an upcoming episode. And now, back to the show. So if I hear you correctly, it sounds like it's important that it's present in the curriculum at all places, not just showing up in things like geography and biology, but in their languages, for example, in their maths, in their economics, as you say, their psychology courses, all these things you need to be seeing and learning more about sustainable practices within that field of discipline. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think linking, particularly, this is a point I was going to make a little bit later on, I think one of the things that kids have difficulty doing is making links between subjects. Mm-hmm. And really, teachers are the people that do that.
Sure.
Some of the very bright, abstract, older students can do it, but a lot of them can't.
Yeah. And we've been seeing this, like we were talking with the director of curriculum development a little bit ago at the IB, and you can see how much of an emphasis there is now to like bring content down a little bit more and concepts up quite a bit.
Right.
And I think concepts taking a greater percentage of the curriculum now allow this overlap and allow this sort of interdisciplinary nature to be really present across the diploma program, where it doesn't matter if you're in, for example, the maths applications and interpretations course. In that same day, you might go from your maths course to your German ab initio course to your biology course and be talking about similar themes just through those different lenses. I think that push with the new conceptual approach is a little bit easier than to find those connections in a sustainable curriculum.
Yeah, I think particularly for looking at many schools in different contexts have to deal with a variety of cultures and languages. It doesn't matter where you live. Mm-hmm. These days that you're not just going to have one mother tongue, there's going to be several mother tongues.
Sure.
And I think being able to use the languages to access local projects, I think is pretty important.
Okay, so it was campus, communication, the community, the culture, and the curriculum. Was that right? Those 5 areas?
Those 5 areas, yeah.
So a school that's really thinking well about sustainability has those 5 C words constantly in their mind, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when you're evaluating these schools, what do you feel like you've seen any schools that are working with the diploma program? Have you seen any that really have been able to still balance this quite well? And is there anything that like stands out with those schools?
Well, I guess there's a bit of a bias, but I've seen particularly where there's strong community engagement has been very significant in the IB schools. There's certainly several examples of that happening here in Switzerland that I'm aware of. The International School of Zug and Lucerne, International School of Geneva, International School of Basel, ICS in Zurich, and so on. And in each of those cases, the schools have made a very genuine effort to relate to local groups and to deal with issues to do with sustainability. And I guess one of the things we should come in here to mention is about considering the broadness of sustainability is not just about nature, but it's also about social issues, and the two are very interrelated.
Now, Court, you've had quite a good experience of seeing many different schools and kind of visiting all of these ones as well. When you think about, I guess, those 5 C's that John was just talking about, do you notice those things really coming out in each of the schools you visit, or does it feel like the sustainability is kind of like an add-on, almost like, oh, we have our green week and then we've done our thing? Or like, how often do you see a school that's really being sustainable?
It's a tricky question because I agree with what you're saying, John, that local connection is really important, but I think that there are different, not advantages, but it's easier in certain schools maybe than others to feel a bit of that local connection. We worked with this amazing school in Colombia that, I mean, they prioritized the way that they were designing their school to be deeply embedded in the kind of cultural practices of the area and have like native artists and things like that, and like really build that connection where even if the students weren't all coming from that area, it was a very international school. You could still, it wasn't like when you enter a city and you're like, I have no idea where I am. It was very obvious that the location mattered and that there was that deep connection there. But I don't think that means, and like you said, John, you don't have to be connected to nature. You could be a school in Dubai. We visited different schools in Dubai where even if they're in the heart of the city and they're not necessarily, they don't have access to a jungle or a stream to clean or things like that, there's still ways that they can talk. I think then they really go into maybe more of the economic side where they're talking about the circular economy and kind of some of the problems that are coming up there, where they can make a bigger difference when they talk about fast, like ultra fast fashion and things like that are really important. And also, yeah, a very different approach, but still an extremely meaningful approach.
This pivots really nicely actually into our second segment, if you will, or what we really want to get into, which is this idea of like learning with and in nature. And do sustainable practices, does the education of sustainability limit itself to being out in nature, or what are the other things that schools need to be considering that go beyond take care of your waste appropriately, use sort of green energy alternatives? So when we talk about like experiential based learning, specifically nature based learning, it can be a really powerful way to build that sustainable mindset. But is there more than that? Is there more that schools can be doing to get that experiential learning that's not just go outside of the school gates, but what else can schools be doing to really get that specific sustainability mindset going?
Well, I think there needs to be basically some knowledge about some of the issues that are faced. And I'll keep coming back to this. I think particularly local issues that are relevant to the kids. So, for example, in most European cities and schools, a big issue is about migration and about refugees.
Sure.
And how do schools deal with that? How do they deal with the integration that they're hoping will occur? And also about how the refugees themselves are being treated. And an example I can think of from Germany was that in Dresden, there were a lot of refugees there from the Ukraine and also earlier on from Syria. And so one of the things that the school did was to actually open up its facilities for the refugees to actually use on the weekends as a way of actually recognising that the school actually had a responsibility to the local community, and that included these refugee people. So I think that's a significant issue that can do it. And also, I mean, there's, no matter where you live, one of the other things which is really obvious is about poverty. And, one of the key indicators to me when I go to a city about poverty is how many people do you see sleeping rough on the, early in the morning or in the afternoon. And what can schools be involved with? Things like soup kitchens and so on that can actually help some of these people.
What I like about that is it's a practical way that students are getting involved with what's happening around them. And I'm glad you brought up like European cities as an example here, because sometimes it can feel like sustainable practices are a little bit distant. Like the need is not right on our doorstep, because it's like, well, I've got some access to clean water and I've got a place to live and things are okay. But what I like with the idea of bringing refugees in and let's use the actual spaces is I think it provides a space now for students to engage in conversations with either, people who have been displaced from their homes, or as you just mentioned, if there's people in poverty who are not living in that space and the students now engage with them, that of course is going to bring in a much better intercultural understanding, a better international mindset, and ideally starting to think about some of these things that may have caused all those issues, which maybe are beyond just what I might be limited to in my curriculum. Would you say that's the aim of what's trying to be done in those schools, or do you think there's something more than that?
Yeah, I think that's certainly an aim. I think one of the other things that's important about this is students actually deciding that this is something they want to work with, so that they have a real buy-in to what they're actually doing. And I was thinking about here in Zurich, and there's similar organisations in Germany that I'm aware of. The Red Cross actually organises courses for kids, trains them to work with refugees, and then asks them for commitment to work with the refugees. And I know that there have been a few students that have been involved with that, and I think that's also something that's really important. I think, of course, one of the things is that sometimes students need a little bit of direction as to where to find those sort of things. And I think that's something which the school and coordinators can play an important role in.
Yeah. Something that I think is also, you kind of touched on it, that I think is really important is if there's no mindset shift, there's no point in doing it. And I mean, I think the classic example is the voluntourism, when a kid goes and they're like, oh, I'm going to volunteer at this really exotic, faraway place. And then I took a lot of pictures in a cool place and I came back and there was never a mindset shift. And I feel like that it does more damage than good in a lot of cases. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you think are the most important elements that have to be there to make it actually meaningful for learning and have that mindset shift?
Look, I couldn't agree with you more about volunteerism. And as you're probably aware, there's plenty of commercial operations that offer experiences for kids.
Yeah.
And there's one, I'll give you an practical example of one that some students I had were involved in. The kids went away for a month doing a pile of different things with a commercial company, including hiking and so on. And then they went to a school, and the service they did was to repaint the school. Anyway, kids went away and painted the school, and they were talking to one of the little kids in Spanish, and he said, well, why are you doing this? And the kid said, because it needs to be done. And he said, no. We had another group last month that came and painted this. And you're thinking, well, what was the point?
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm sure there are some good commercial experiences, but I'm a bit skeptical about the value of them.
Yeah.
But it does bring up this question. I know as a former CAS coordinator and just thinking about like the CAS trips and CAS experiences that some schools may put together, there is something quite profound about an experience that takes you off-site, and it's a trip with you talk to alumni who come from a school, and often they'll remember those experiences more than they remember the day-to-day in the curriculum. So there's an opportunity there of actually doing, you brought up metanoia earlier, right? With like, and that's all about a transformation in the heart and the mind that leads to behavioral changes, right?
Right.
So sometimes those experiences, whether it's a trip or something like that, it's rife with opportunity to have a real transformation. How do you, like, if you're a CAS coordinator listening right now or a DP coordinator right now, how can you take that thing that's got good opportunity and turn it into real, lasting, sustainable change so that it's worthwhile and it's not just repainting the walls that were painted a week ago?
Right. I think the first thing, this is quite complicated, I think, because from a school perspective, you're working with an organisation, with a group in another country. The first thing that's really important is having a clear cultural understanding of the group you're working with, and also having someone on the ground who's reliable and accountable for what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's critical. I'll give you an example of this in a moment that I'm aware of. The second thing is in terms of the kids going there, being very clear about what they can actually do, which is going to be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it, going and building houses, walls, and so on could be better done by local people.
Right.
Because when kids go to do that, they're basically labourers.
Yeah.
And not very skillful labourers at that, from my own observation. Some are, but most of them aren't.
It'd be like when I renovated my van and then it was like, oh, never mind, it doesn't work. Don't look at it.
So I think that's one of the things. What can the kids do that is actually going to be constructive and helpful? And then I think the kids need to be also to have some preparation about the culture they're going to face and the differences there are and the challenges that presents. And I think that's something that's very, very important. And the other thing is, I think that when the students get there, that they also have some time to realise what they're going to be able to do and also to get a feel for the local environment. And if I can backtrack to give you an example of one of the things I was talking about, the International School of Frankfurt's had a long-time project in the Kalahari.
Mm-hmm.
And originally that started with a religious person that was working there and working with a group of displaced people that had been displaced during apartheid. And so they were, the school was able to have someone they knew that was honest and very clear about the needs of the local people. And so they could work towards that. And, you know, they did go through the stage of building things, but they realised later on that a bigger need was that the quality of the education which was provided for the kids, because at one stage one of the high schools in the area had not had one kid in 20 years who'd actually matriculated through the South African system. And so one of the things they did was to be involved in providing some coaching and also some PD for teaching. And then later on, being able to provide some assistance with teaching materials and resources to the school in South Africa.
I could see where that has such a stronger impact then, because if I draw the connections between what you've said so far, it's this idea that you need to have somebody who has a personal connection to the space. So it's not really going to work if you just upend everybody and go somewhere where there's no actual connection beforehand.
You knock on the door and you're like, hey, I'm here with my hammer. I'm ready to build stuff.
Would that be dangerous, Courtney?
Yeah. For multiple reasons, John.
I know. And picture, neither of you are going to probably get a Gilmore Girls reference, but she was like a high schooler and she shows up with her pink painted hammer with like a little ribbon on it, ready to save the day. But yes.
Yeah. So it's got to have that like student connection to the space and better if it's in a local context or some way that they actually know it. But it sounds like what you're leading to here is like there's got to be student agency in terms of how they... Yeah. One, they know what's going into it. Two, they know how they can realistically and long term make a positive solution here. So let's pivot here and kind of into this sort of last segment, I guess, which is like moving from awareness of an issue into agency of it. Like, how do we make sure that students are taking agency over this idea of having sustainable practices, whether they are in a CAS experience, like the one we just discussed, or if it's taking place in their school? How can we move students from that, I know there's an issue, to here's how I'm going to take action on it?
Okay, I think that one of the things which is really important here is actually developing student competencies. And sorry if I'm going to be a bit theoretical here, but I think it covers a lot of bases. I was reading an article, a piece of research which was done in Germany, and they identified 8 key competencies they thought students needed.
For sustainability or in general?
About sustainability in particular, okay? So the first one was about thinking about systems and understanding what a system is, and also, importantly, how students relate, what's their part in the system. I think that's something that's very important. The careers program of the IB has got a new community engagement program. And this is one of the things they actually stressed, was about students being aware of their role and being able to reflect on that. And that's going to require some tweaking. Perhaps, as a biology teacher, that you would say that's given that everybody understands about systems thinking. But we both know that not everybody does biology, and not everybody does geography, and not everybody does perhaps economics. Mm-hmm. So where is this going to come in the curriculum?
Sure.
And what's the awareness of that, okay? Second point is really about being able to evaluate and see what futures there are. They call that anticipatory competency. The third one is to be able to look at one's own actions and see how that fits in with norms and expectations there are, and to be able to relate those to sustainability values and norms. And another important one is really about management and strategic competency, being able to look at the longer term, how are we going to go forward with this. Mm-hmm. Collaboration's another one, which of course I think is actually quite challenging, particularly when we look at the kids doing the IB diploma. They struggle with that, about working collaboratively. They're not actually encouraged to do that very often in many cases.
I mean, obviously, one of the approach to learning emphases is about collaboration as well. So I guess it's that, where can teachers intentionally scaffold that collaboration in all of their curriculum? Because I think that is a core emphasis that the IB is trying to push forward, is like those collaborative skills as well.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is really about outrospection or empathy with others and understanding others. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a challenge these days.
Sure.
Much more than it was, I think, in time. And that's a bit to do with some of the isolation that comes with social media obsession.
That's exactly what I was just thinking as well. It's pretty easy to just become yourself with your phone or your device and not actually interact with other people. So I guess there's that distinction between collaborating effectively and then also just like feeling comfortable interacting with other people, right? Right.
And then I think a big one is being able to think critically about what's going on, and not just to be emotional about what's being done, and to have the ability to self-reflect. And I think that's quite challenging. This is slightly off the topic, but when I look at, as I mark extended essays, and one of the things the kids have to do there is reflect on their research process, they're appalling at it. It's just not very good.
Which is surprising because, if you talk to most DP students, they are exhausted with reflecting. They're like, I reflect all the time and I feel like I'm just reflecting. So if as a EE examiner, you're commenting on like pretty poor reflection, then I think that also comes back to teachers in terms of modeling it and scaffolding, like what is a good reflection? And is it just like thinking back and describing an experience that I've done? No, it's going back and evaluating that and finding more in terms of here's what I've done, here's how I've analyzed it, and here's how I can move forward in a different and better way. And I think as you're describing right now, you could see where intentional reflection would have a very positive impact on sustainable thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you. But one of the big positive changes about the extended essay actually is that now the kids don't have to do 3 reflections, just 1 reflection, which I think makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the quality of them. Anyway, to move on, critical thinking, I think, is one of the key things there is, and I think TOK helps kids a lot with that, and to actually think about particular issues, and also to see how different disciplines approach that, and see the differences and similarities between that. And I think when it's taught well, that actually helps kids quite a bit. A lot of kids struggle with it, as you know, to start with, because it's so abstract.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes them a while for the penny to drop, I think. That satiates into a couple of the other things they mentioned here about self-awareness and the ability to problem solve. And I think those are things which we hope that the kids have actually started to develop through the last couple of years of school. So those are some of the competencies, I think, which are absolutely essential and which schools need to take on board. And I'm not sure, I did a workshop on community engagement a few weeks ago. I'm not sure how much teachers actually feel so comfortable with that.
Today's cog tip is from Tanya Mana from Advanced Learning Schools. Tanya says, I love using Cognity's progress and engagement reports to see how my students are really doing. It's a quick way to spot who's getting it, who's struggling, and what I might need to revisit in class. This has been super helpful for planning my next steps. Thanks for sharing, Tanya. No, I think that it's tricky. And I think that one piece that you talked about was where does emotion come into play? And I think that it's something that is really important to have the emotional connection, and that they show that, as you get older, you do have to have a little bit of frustration or anger with the way things are and that desire to change. Or,
yeah, sure.
I mean, back in my Florida days, I worked at a zoo presenting animals, and they always said that, when a child interacts with a cute animal, great start to building sustainable practices and getting that emotional tie-in of when you could argue for a lot of other things about zoos, but the idea that if you have an emotional connection to what you're working towards, you're going to have a more profound impact and desire for change. And I'm wondering at the DP level, how do you balance that of getting students not riled up, but get them to care, get them to have that emotional reaction to kind of some of these bigger issues that you want them to work towards being change makers, versus how do you keep them from not spiraling into a doom of, we're all screwed, forget it.
Yeah, I think that again comes down to manageable situations and ones which are at the kids' level within local issues. I mean, look, if you take a simple example about climate change, that appears on the face of things, you think, well, what's the point of living? I mean, we're all going to burn in the next 20 or 30 years, and there's going to be horrific storms and so on and so on. I mean, that's, the factual stuff which there is about climate change all suggests that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But we can look at things which are going to help improve things on a local basis. And I think one of the key things about sustainability, which is very important, is that not many of us can change things on a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't have the power or the ability.
Mm-hmm.
But we can do things personally in our own lives to change that. Mm-hmm. And I think making the students aware of what they can do locally to improve the situation is important. And I think the other thing is that you must approach this with a very positive mindset.
Yeah. It reminds me, in the biology course that I teach, obviously with the diploma program, once we get to our ecology and conservation unit, I actually flip the assessment model and I don't make it a typical like paper 1, paper 2 assessment style that they might see in biology. Instead, I flip it and I say, your assessment of this unit is what I call the climate call to action project, which is I need to see evidence of how you are sharing awareness or you're taking action on some sort of climate related thing in our context. And it kind of gives students the chance to dive into what's happening in our area. So a brief example, I had one student who evaluated what we had on offer in our cafe in terms of like the milk offering. Did we just have cow's milk or were we also offering plant-based milk? And where was that milk coming from? And just did a little bit of a study around that thing and built awareness in our own context. And another one also looked at like the food practices at our, where we go for lunches. Where's that food coming from? That sort of thing. So really pushing it to the students to say, in this context, how are you going to take some action and move this forward? And I'm wondering, in your experience, have you come across other practices that maybe either build more of an authentic assessment around sustainability practices or just help students understand their contributions and responsibilities in their local context, which can then widen out to their global context?
If I can, I'd talk about a couple of schools that I've seen where this has happened. One example I can think of, and again, this is a social situation and not related directly to assessment. Okay, well, let me stress that. But in Indonesia, in Jakarta, the British school in Jakarta is located next to a slum area called, I think, Bengaru. And one of the things which the kids saw there as a need was, first of all, to register kids so they'd be entitled to healthcare and even passport and go to school. Mm-hmm. And then they decided that as a CAS project and also the design technology project, that they would actually design a school made out of bamboo and iron that they could source. And then the students were actually involved in constructing that as part of a project that they had to do for design technology.
Cool.
And it proved to be the first school. Mm-hmm. Right? So they got kids in there. That has since progressed as a school, is now a secondary school. And the latest project that the school was involved in was that they wanted to build a pre-primary centre. So what they did was they got hold of lots of PET bottles, and there's plenty of those in slums, and they filled the PET bottles up with sand and paper and constructed a building out of it for the little kids to play in. And things like the tops of the bottles were used as playthings and little things made up. And they were all designed by students and also part of a project that they'd actually carried out for design technology. And also, of course, it fits beautifully into a CAS project. I think it was very interesting what you said about flipping that. I would say that one of the things which is also from a curriculum point of view in the diploma, my experience with teaching it was also looking particularly at a sustainable issue. And the example I can think of, which you'd probably be familiar with, John, is the impact that downhill skiing has on the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And looking at that and just because they're older students, actually measuring what the changes are and looking at soil depth, vegetation cover and diversity and so on, and also the amount of land that's actually been cleared for the piece itself and the impact that's having on the local environment. And then talking about how some of these slopes can be rehabilitated, because one of the things which is definitely changing here is the snow limit is getting higher and higher each year. So now we've got ski slopes which are down at 900 or 1,000 metres, which are just not being used, and yet you've got a bare piece of ground. So what do we do to rehabilitate that bit of land?
Yeah. It's cool that you just brought that up. That's actually exactly what we focused on for our most recent collaborative sciences project. And speaking of the IBDP curriculum, one of the things I really love about especially the new science courses is in that collaborative sciences project, it's intentional that the students look beyond the sciences. So they look into things in the economy, for example, or they look into citizen science projects and these sort of things that might bring it all together. So it's almost intentionally pushing students to think in that direction. And that, I think, brings up exactly what you're talking about, is that when we talk about sustainability, it's not always the thing that's right in front of our face. There's many, many layers there. And so I think what we've discussed so far today is not just what a good one looks like in terms of schools that really kind of get this practice right, and not just getting students to engage with it in their own purposeful way, but like how we can take that awareness that maybe the curriculum provides and then turn that into student-led agency kind of projects on here's the impact that I can have in these spaces. So I guess as we come to a close, are there maybe like a couple of top takeaways or top things that you think an educator can really do to make sure that they're embedding this in their schools?
Let me give that a little bit of thought. Okay, so first of all, if we're looking at this at a school level, I think one of the things that is essential is you've got to have a champion of some sort, preferably an administrator, but a champion teacher. Then I think what's also important is that there is a group of people alongside this person that is prepared to support it. And particularly in a K-12 school, having people involved right across the age grades, then I think it's important to have students directly involved. And I think one of the things which is key, which I remember seeing at the International School of Zug, was they had a conference one day about identifying the key needs that the school had and what are some of the solutions to it in terms of sustainability. So what followed that was, of course, breaking that down into some groups and then having the students come up with some suggestions about changes. Now, you mentioned the stuff about food in the Mensa and things like that. Well, that's one example of it. But they were also looking at how kids got to school, for example, and how that could change. And I think getting the kids then to actually play a role in actually developing what's going to happen. They're going to need some help, and there'll be some times when, for a whole lot of reasons, that some of the suggestions they have just aren't feasible, right? And I think the other thing is that's very important is that the students are supported with the competencies they need to be able to do this well. And there needs to be, at some point, an evaluation of what's going on, how effective it is, and what are some of the issues. My own experience as a CAS coordinator, there were lots of times where kids hit brick walls, and that's always a big learning experience for them, where they can then be shown how to move on from the brick wall and see what's the way forward in doing things. So I think that's something that's very important.
So we need a champion. We need a group around that champion. We need some students who are, interested in doing this thing, and I guess teachers then providing the space for them to get that done, and then a way to like feedback on that and see the effectiveness of it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there's one other thing which is really important, which is not always within the realms of the school, is actually some professional development for staff.
Sure.
There's lots of courses that I'm aware of commercially for developing and teaching about sustainability, and also the opportunity for bringing people into the school that are very wise about that. And I can think of several examples of where that's come about. I don't know whether Courtney's come across Compass in action in Dubai and in some of the other places. And, they're doing a fantastic job. And I think that also looking at some of the universities that are offering some very good courses and material on sustainability that actually have recognition as well. Personally, I found one of the things which had developed my own understanding of sustainability was using FutureLearn and taking some of the short courses they did. And that really broadened my experience and knowledge about things.
Thank you so much, John. I think it's really nice to end on, quite a few ways that teachers can take things into their own hands, or administrators can think about ways that they can support their teachers in getting that PD and really that reflection. I do think the evaluation part is important, to take that step back and say, where is our school right now, but where do we actually want to be? We can't just say, you don't need a certification, you don't need to become a green school, which, things like that are great opportunities, but there can be really systemic changes that happen in your school even without that you can kind of get started with just by learning and asking the right questions and thinking about how to get your kids involved. So thank you so much for today. It's been a great, great topic to explore with you, and I appreciate being able to catch up with you again and talk more about it.
Just before I go, one of the things I would say is this, that I think that sustainability is most effective when it's a whole school approach. And we talked a little bit about nature earlier on, and I think one of the biggest challenges that faces educators at the moment is young people's alienation from nature. And I think particularly providing young kids, with the primary school kids, with the opportunity of being in nature and exploring it for themselves, letting them ask some questions about that, is really critical for the future. One of the things I didn't mention earlier on, which is something which staggered me, about an international school in China that actually removed all the grass, removed all the wooden furniture, replaced it with plastic grass, and placed it with plastic furniture for kids. And their logic was it was safer. But certainly not going to help the kids to have a great connection with nature. But I think that's one of the things which is really important for the future. It has been a pleasure to talk with you both, and of course to renew acquaintances with Courtney. I've learned a little bit more about Courtney tonight, about her days in the zoo, which I didn't know about before, and of course to meet you, John. It's lovely to have a chat with you both, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for taking the time. Great to meet you as well. So what an enriching conversation that was with John. I mean, so many really useful takeaways about how to create an authentic, sustainable school, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think I love how different Cass looks at different schools, and I love hearing about kind of how he's gone into so many different schools to really see how they're building out sustainability. I think it's been, really fun to hear all the different examples. I was laughing afterwards about the school with the paint of going and the kid being like, "Why are you painting? We just painted.
We just painted this last time as well." So many good things there. So if you're an educator listening, what would be kind of the key takeaways? What do you think are like the most important things they could action right away?
I think the evaluation piece is where you start. He was talking about the metanoia approach, the 5 C's. It was campus, communication, community, culture, collaboration. Just starting, where do you fall in your school and which parts do you need to focus on most? I think that's a good place to start, to know where you are. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, the one that stood out for me is lead by example. Don't just have it in your mission statement, don't just have it written on the walls, but get involved in all those projects. Make sure that you are being an ambassador for a sustainable school.
Yep. And then I would say the last one would be probably that going from awareness into action, and how much you can't just put all of the emphasis on reflection afterwards. But if you want that experiential learning that's going to lead to creating these change makers in your students and having students want to make a difference, you have to put the work in with the planning of how do I really create this emphasis around the mindset shift and what's going on. You can't just say, throw any experience together like the voluntourism examples and then just reflect about it later.
Right.
It really needs to be deliberately part of the planning.
Yep, fully agreed. So we hope you enjoyed this episode of IB Unplugged, and we hope to see you next time for another great episode where you can improve as an IB educator.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.